What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. The unexpected happened. We now have Tropical Storm Andrea in the subtropical Atlantic. Our first named storm of the 2025 hurricane season formed today, June 24th, 2025. And from then on out, it's go time for this season. So we're going to go ahead and be talking about Andrea as well as some other chances of development that I've been paying attention to as well. So let's go ahead and dive right into it right now. So here's the NHC, ladies and gentlemen. This is our first storm, Tropical Storm Andrea. Is it going to do very much? No. But the significance of this was there were so many people that were saying, oh, there's nothing going to be happening in June. Nothing's going to develop in June. Well, and I was actually even considering that myself, and I was saying, I don't think anything's going to happen in June unless something unexpected happens. And this is the something unexpected right here. So let's go ahead and quickly talk about this right here and go ahead and go to the public advisory. This is the first public advisory for the Atlantic. We've been mainly covering East Pacific stuff. So this is our situation that we have right here. Maximum sustained winds are 40 miles per hour. Minimum central pressure is 1014 millibars, so pretty high pressure for a tropical storm, but this is also in the subtropics, so that you have to take that into account. A little change in strength is expected today. Weakening is expected to begin tonight with Andrea dissipating by Wednesday night. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 45 miles from the center. So that's your situation right there, folks. And let's go ahead and quickly look at discussion. I want to see why did they go for this and why did they call this a tropical storm. So let's go ahead and briefly read the discussion. The area of low pressure between Bermuda and the Azores that we have been monitoring for the last few days in Vest 90L developed a persistent deep convection overnight. This is shown by latest subjective Dvorak estimates right here, and the current wind estimate of 35 knots is supported by the last several scatterometer passes, but showing 30 to 35 knot winds. Even though deep convection is now decreasing due to the persistent convection overnight and pulsing convection over the past 36 hours, the system has met the criteria to be classified as a tropical storm, albeit a marginal one, making Tropical Storm Andrea the first Atlantic storm of the year. Andrea will be short-lived, environmental conditions will continue to decrease, water temperature is going to plummet, all of that stuff right there. So that's kind of your quick advisory and discussion from the National Hurricane Center. Let's go ahead now and move on to the Eastern Pacific. And we can go ahead and talk about this area of interest right here. We really haven't seen that much of an increase of formation. There have been some models that have been having the system push further and further towards land. So you're going to want to see how that will pan out. But here's the situation right now. An area of low pressure located a few hundred miles south of the coast of Guatemala continues to produce disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Environmental conditions appear conducive for gradual development of the system later this week, and a tropical depression is likely to form over the weekend while the system moves slowly west-northwestward off the coast of southern Mexico. Formation chance in the next 48 hours, low is 10%. Formation chance in the next 7 days is 70%. So we really haven't seen that much of a change. That's mainly because the models are struggling and having a hard time figuring out if this is going to develop, if this is going to move inland, if it's going to stay out to sea. They're having a hard time figuring that aspect of it out. So that's kind of the situation that we have in the Eastern Pacific. Now let's go ahead and move on to satellite imagery. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about Tropical Storm Andrea right here. Andrea, rather. I keep saying it in a weird way. I apologize for that. But here's the satellite imagery for Andrea. It's pretty much bare right here. It's been having convection going on for at least off and on for the last 36 hours. We can actually go ahead and go back. We're going to go back to 120 frames just to show you this as well. So here's what we had. We had convection starting to bubble up a little bit, but ultimately it wasn't doing that much. And that's why I said yesterday at the time I recorded the video, I was like, yeah, I don't see this really developing. I don't really see this developing into much unless something unexpected happens. But then, starting around 8 o'clock Eastern time, you're noticing more convection started to fire up. You saw one final burst of convection really blow up. And this wasn't, like a popcorn convection or anything like that. It actually sustained itself pretty well. It sustained itself overnight as well. It continued to organize, it continued to develop, and it continued to show tropical storm characteristics. Then, early this morning, we saw more convection really flare up over here near the center of circulation, and that's when the NHC went, this is a tropical storm right here. Now, granted, convection has died off since then, but at that point, they designated it a tropical storm, and off to the races we go. So that's kind of their justification as to why this became a tropical cyclone. So that's kind of why. It's had a low-level circulation for quite some time. The thing that kind of prohibited this from being classified as a tropical storm earlier was because there wasn't enough convection near the center of circulation. So that's kind of the situation that we had. Once we had persistent convection over there, the NHC just went ahead, jumped the gun, and said, this is a tropical storm. Now, there has been some debate on whether how long this will last, whether it'll dissipate at in like an hour by the time you see this, or tonight, or even tomorrow morning. We're going to have to see how that happens. I personally think they're going to do another advisory at 5 p.m. and then they're going to call it a night afterward. But we'll have to see how that will ultimately pan out. But first storm of the season, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we're looking at. Now we'll go ahead and, just for craps and giggles, show you the models, just to kind of show you what Andrea as well as that area of interest is doing, and then we'll get onto some conditions. So here's the European, already kind of tagging this whole area right here, this low pressure system in the subtropics, expected to persist through much of the day, and then it's expected to weaken starting I would say late afternoon into the evening, and then by tonight it's expected to become more absorbed with this low pressure over here off the coast of Canada, and then it's going to dissipate and just move on its merry way. Now, in terms of what we're seeing with tropical development in the eastern Pacific, that's a little bit more complicated. The European has the system organizing, trying to develop, but it's kind of having some organizational issues with it. I think this is because it's a broad area of convection, as well as some of the conditions that are not quite right. Although the European does have the system moving off pretty quickly, 1,000 millibars as it gets towards cooler conditions, so it kind of takes its time to develop. So this is telling me one of two things. Number one, this is more of a long-term threat, and that's why the NHC has designated it. Yet, and number two, there's uncertainty on how the conditions will kind of impact the tropical development over in that region. So that's something, and that's a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to. 1,000 millibars, and then it starts weakening, dissipating as it moves off into the cooler conditions over there. Now let's go ahead and show you the GFS. GFS has been pretty interesting. GFS has this weakening, at least Andrea has it weakening and then just dissipating pretty much by tonight or tomorrow. And then you have this area of interest over here in the Eastern Pacific starting to organize and develop. It too takes its time, although the GFS has this developing quicker than the European and actually gets to hurricane strength potentially before it moves into cooler conditions and ultimately weakens as a factor of that. So that's the GFS's run right there. The next one we'll go ahead and talk about is the Canadian run. Canadian run's been pretty interesting with this. CMC has Andrea pretty much weakening and then dissipating by tomorrow, and then the area of interest in the EPAC has it organizing, developing. It actually has it around hugging the coast and actually making landfall and not really developing at all. So that's kind of why I was saying there was some uncertainty in terms of whether it was going to hit land, whether it was going to stay off to sea, because we're seeing model runs indicate that maybe this will head closer to land than we initially thought. So that's the Canadian run. Last thing we'll go ahead and show you is the icon right here. So here's the icon, basically same thing with Andrea, and then the Eastern Pacific development, organizing, developing, very slowly, and then it starts to try to get its act together as it approaches Mexico, potentially gets down to hurricane strength as it hugs the coast. The icon, interestingly, is actually the strongest run out of all of them. So you're going to want to pay attention to see how this system will ultimately pan out if you are along the Guerrero and the Oaxaca coast, because that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. but then it starts weakening due to cooler conditions and dissipating, and that's pretty much the last we will see of that. So that's our kind of model runs that we can look at in terms of tropical development. The next thing I want to take a look at now is kind of the conditions going forward, more long-term stuff, because we've been looking at this, the conditions starting around in the next few days and even right now and going into July do look more and more favorable for tropical development. So my question now is, okay, I'm looking at these conditions. How are they going to pan out, and how are we going to potentially see some tropical development? And will we see some stuff happening in July? The answer I will say to you that is, we're definitely going to have a more likely probability in next month than we did in June. And if you consider the fact that we had a tropical storm as kind of our low point right there for the month of June, then I would say that we could see some more tropical systems trying to develop in the month of July. We're going to have to wait and see how that will happen, and we'll have to look at the conditions and kind of diagnose, okay, where's the most probable scenarios. But by and large, it does look like July, at least in terms of what we're seeing potentially happening in parts of the main development region, as well as off the Carolina coast and the mid-Atlantic and the western part of the Atlantic Ocean. We do see some increased probabilities of development, but let's go ahead and take a look at some conditions right here. Let's go ahead and start with the sea surface temperatures. We do this every day. We look at them. We give an analysis. We go, okay, sea surface temperatures. What do we think is going to happen? What exactly are we looking at right here? So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. That map isn't quite updated, so I will take a quick look at the SST maps that are there. If they haven't been updated yet, we'll just go. We'll just kind of run with yesterday's, as well as the climate reanalyzer. Actually, let's just go to the climate reanalyzer and do it that way. So here's the climate reanalyzer right here. Taking a look at the Atlantic as a whole, it looks like it has slowed down in terms of its heating just temporarily. It's still going to warm up, don't get me wrong, and all of that, but it's slowed down and it's heating up. That's going to be temporary, especially as we start getting into July. July is really when the water temperatures start to crank up. That's kind of how it does it climatologically. That's what it was like in 2023 and 2024. They really cranked up for both of these months. So July 1st in 2023, we went from 23.6 to almost 25 degrees. And then in 2024, we went from 23.49 to about 24.82. So that's at least per capita one of the months where it warms up the most. So you're going to want to pay attention to that going forward. So maybe this late June dip and increase is going to be temporary. Then it's going to start surging for the rest of July, and you can already start to see how that's going to pan out going forward right here. And you can also notice too how it's really turned up in temperatures again on the western part of the Atlantic basin. So that's the North Atlantic in a nutshell. Looking at the main development region is relatively around average right here for this time of year. It started off pretty above average, but then it's kind of cooled off and remained below around the average right there. So that's something to pay attention to. Part of that is because, as you can see, there are some cool anomalies over there. Also, part of it, too, is because there's some cool anomalies just to the north of it as well. We're going to have to watch and see how that will ultimately pan out. In terms of what we're looking at with the other stuff, let's go ahead and show you the Gulf region right here. Taking a look at the Gulf, we've eclipsed, ladies and gentlemen, this for June 23rd. We have eclipsed last year, and we have broken the record for the warmest temperature in the Gulf on this day in history. We have now eclipsed that. Typically, what you notice is a bit of a dip and a nosedive and all that stuff. We cracked 2010's record for June 23rd. That is something you should not be taking lightly, ladies and gentlemen. And the Gulf is going to continue to warm because you have high pressure systems, you have heat domes hitting the eastern United States. That's going to help warm it up as well. You're also noticing, though, some more mesoscale convection kind of trying to fight back a little bit, cool off the SSTs a little bit as well. Same thing with the currents as well. But right now, we are at the warmest recorded temperature on this day in history. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was something I did not want to say. In part because that's not only going to make hurricane season worse, especially if a tropical cyclone similar to Helene and Milton ends up entering the Gulf region and then just explosively intensifies because of the amount of OHC and warm water there is up there. But that also has environmental problems as well. Reefs have been known to bleach out in temperatures that have been too warm. We saw that en masse along the Florida Keys 2 years ago. Also, there's going to be more invasive species and all of that stuff. I know that doesn't pertain too much to hurricane season, but I think for folks who care about the environment that watch this video, that's something to pay attention to as well. So that's your sea surface temperatures. So that's your water temperatures on the surface. What are they looking like a little bit further deep? Well, here's what we're looking at right here. Ocean heat content has been pretty interesting. It's continuing to get It's continuing to increase across parts of the Atlantic basin. It's continuing to consolidate in the northwestern Caribbean. The loop current is a little interesting. You're noticing these increases, then it fluctuates, and then it increases, then it fluctuates, and all of that. But by and large, and if you take a look at the trends, we've seen a pretty big increase across much of the Gulf. So that's something to pay attention to. Also, the Eastern Caribbean Sea, we're starting to see more SST temperatures really start to turn up the OHC, and same thing in the main development region. If we go ahead and go back to what we saw on this is last year's stuff, but if we go ahead and go back to what we saw on June 1st of this year, just to kind of give you some context. Right here, there's a lot further to the south. That's June 24th. I meant to go to June 1st. But it was a lot further to the south, and it wasn't quite as expansive. Looking at it now, it's quite a bit more expansive, and it's pushing further and further up to the north. July is also going to be the month where the OHC increases by the largest, predominantly because you're seeing all that SST warming. And the waters that are already warm are only going to get warmer deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's also another factor to pay attention to. I know I've been talking a lot about SSTs and all of that stuff. Let's go ahead and get over to the wind shear and the moisture just to kind of wrap this up and get this out there on a nice little bow. So let's go ahead and start the wind shear potential across much of the Atlantic, starting for late June and going into early July. So here's what we have right now. Basically, this is what you would expect for June, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of very strong wind shear across much of the region, and not really to that like wavy where you're seeing a lot of troughs and ridges and all of that stuff. It's pretty concentrated. But as you start to notice, starting in the next few days, you're looking at it, the MDR starts to show signs of less wind shear. You're starting to notice that the wind shear is lifting further up to the north. You're also noticing a more trough and ridgy pattern starting to form right here. By June 26th, it really gets it really starts to get amplified. And then by the 27th, you're noticing that as well. You're noticing a decrease in shear as well because of these troughs and ridges. How the shear has been lifting up more and more to the north right here. And then you're noticing, starting to notice some collapsing in the wind shear. Noticing the main development region starts to, at least in terms of wind shear alone, be more open for business. In terms of other parts in the Caribbean, not quite just yet, but you're going to start seeing those fluctuations and increases and decreases, folks. But by and large, what you're noticing with this is the wind shear across the Atlantic starts to really fluctuate, and it really starts to nosedive starting on the first week of July. So that's another factor you're going to want to pay attention to. And I do think conditions get more favorable for development because of this wind shear pattern. Now, the main question is, because I personally do not think wind shear is going to be the factor that makes or breaks tropical development in this month. It's personally going to be the dry air. So what's that looking like? Well, if you take a look at that, there's still a thing called Sahara dust right here, folks. And ultimately, what you're looking at with this right here is you're noticing an increase of moisture across much of the main development region, which is something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Yes, there is some Sahara dust that's going to suppress tropical development initially. At least for the first few days of July, I don't see much tropical development after that. But watch starting around July 6th, July 7th, July 8th. You're noticing more moisture moving into the region, and you're going to want to pay attention to that as well, not to mention the anomalies that we're watching as well. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow. This video is mainly focused more so on Andrea since that had developed, but we will keep you updated on all of these threats here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, or ask us questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.